Have you ever been in exile? Not just away from home, but feeling alienated from others, from yourself, and even from God? Perhaps you've lost your job or your home, gone through a separation or divorce, or mourned the loss of a loved one. Perhaps you feel alone, adrift, and unseen. If so, you're in good company. Everyone experiences exile at some point, just as the nation of Israel did during their Babylonian captivity. What can their story teach us? As we explore the book of Daniel, let's uncover how even in the desolation of exile, God's mercy shines brightly, refining his people through fire and transforming pain into a profound hope. Shalom and welcome back to God's Story, Our Story, Catholics for Israel's online Bible course. I'm Dr. Andre Villeneuve. Previously in our study of the books of Kings, we witnessed the dramatic rise and fall of Israel's kingdom. From the splendor of Solomon's reign to the devastating destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity, it seemed as though God's promises had failed. Was this truly the end for Israel? Yet, as we saw last time, the prophets assured God's people of a glorious future still to come. Today we journey with Israel into their exile. God raised up a young man named Daniel to reveal his plan, to watch over the faithful remnant of his people, to bring down wicked nations, and to restore Jerusalem. Through Daniel, God unveiled a vision of his kingdom established on earth, ruled with justice by a mysterious Son of Man. Astonishingly, God foretold the coming of a future anointed one, a Messiah who by being cut off would bring his divine purposes to fulfillment. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, and post your questions and comments below. Exile, the Babylonian captivity, and the Book of Daniel. In our study of the books of Kings, we saw that in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem and takes away some of its people to Babylon. One of these men who was deported is Daniel. Nearly 20 years later, Nebuchadnezzar returns. He then destroys Jerusalem and carries the rest of the Jews away into Babylonian captivity. This is the setting in which we find ourselves today. Here is the map that shows Babylonian supremacy over the ancient Near East. As you can see, Babylonia controlled the entire Fertile Crescent, including the land of Israel. Here is the timeline that we used as we studied the books of Kings. On the top in yellow, you can see the line of the kings of Israel up to their deportation by the Assyrians in 722 BC. And on the bottom in green, you can see the line of the kings of Judah up to their deportation by the Babylonians in 586 BC. That's when the temple was destroyed, and we now find ourselves in the period of the exile, when the main prophets were Ezekiel and Daniel. Here is another timeline where you can see the major prophets: Jeremiah, the last prophet before the exile, then Ezekiel and Daniel, and here is the exilic period when there is no temple, and next time we will see the return of the Jews to Zion at the period of Ezra and Nehemiah. The major kings that we encounter in the book of Daniel are first the kings of Babylon, including the infamous Nebuchadnezzar. The next three kings are not mentioned in Daniel, but we do hear about Belshazzar, who reigned alongside his father Nabonidus. The reign of the kings of Babylon will come to an end when their empire is toppled by the kings of Medo-Persia, including Cyrus the Great, who conquers Babylon in 539 BC, and Darius the Mede, who is otherwise unknown outside of the book of Daniel. So those are the major kings that appear in the book of Daniel. Outline of the book of Daniel. This is a somewhat complex outline that is color-coded because the book has reached us in 3 languages. So parts of the book are written in Hebrew, parts are written in Aramaic, and we also have later editions written in Greek. So this is what the book looks like. The first half of the book, the first 6 chapters, are fairly simple tales or stories about Daniel in the court of the Babylonian and Persian kings. This includes Daniel's faithfulness to God in the Babylonian court. And then right from chapter 2, as you can see, the color changes. So the first chapter is written in Hebrew, and beginning with chapter 2, the text switches to Aramaic, which was the international language at the time. So chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue. Then chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar's golden image and the fiery furnace. This is followed by the first Greek edition, the prayer of Azariah and the song of the 3 young men in the furnace. Then chapter 4 tells us about Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the tree, and chapter 5, Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall. In chapter 6, the setting shifts to the kings of Media and Persia, and so under Darius we have the episode of the lion's den. Then beginning with chapter 7, the text shifts from these fairly simple stories about Daniel to much more complex, mysterious, but fascinating visions of Daniel. So in chapter 7, we have this first vision of the 4 beasts, and then in chapter 8, the text switches back to Hebrew with the vision of the ram and goat. Chapter 9, we have the oracle of the 70 years, Daniel's prayer, and the 70 weeks. Then we have Daniel's final vision in chapters 10 to 12. The book then has a type of appendix, which is only extant in the Greek versions, and this includes the story of Susanna and the elders, and Bel and the dragon. So as you can see, a fairly complex composition of the book of Daniel. We begin with the book of Daniel. Daniel is in Babylon. The book introduces us to Daniel and his 3 companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those men are also given Babylonian names. Daniel is called Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends are also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 4 young men are faithful to God. They do not want to defile themselves by eating Babylonian food, and so they are given permission to eat only vegetables. Daniel and his friends excel in all matters of wisdom and understanding in Babylon. So right from the beginning of the book, we see this really interesting contrast between Daniel and his 3 friends who are in exile, far away from home, in this situation of desolation and alienation, but they also distinguish themselves by their faithfulness to their God. This is quite in contrast to the situation of the people that we have seen until today, as they were home in Judah, being blessed with all of God's gifts, but again and again turned away from the Lord in their idolatry and apostasy. And so the first thing we learn from the book of Daniel is how in the midst of exile, they can actually be closer to God thanks to their faithfulness and loyalty to Him and to His commandments. One thing that's extraordinary about the book of Daniel is how God reveals Himself through these pagan kings who are anything but godly. And so none other than Nebuchadnezzar has a mysterious dream. He calls the wise men of his kingdom, and quite unreasonably, he asks them not only to interpret the dream, but even to tell him what he dreamed. Of course, this is an unreasonable request. The wise men say, "There's no way we can know what you dreamt. If you only tell us what your dream was, then we will be able to interpret it." Nebuchadnezzar is furious, so he makes a decree that all these wise men are to be executed, including Daniel and his 3 friends. Daniel intervenes. He prays to the Lord that this dream may be revealed to him, and indeed God reveals to Daniel what the king has dreamt. Daniel goes on to pray a beautiful prayer where he gives thanks to God and blesses him, so he is brought before the king and describes his dream. What did Nebuchadnezzar dream? He dreamt of a great image or statue with a head of gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet of iron and clay. Then the king saw a stone cut not by human hands that destroys the statue and becomes a great mountain that fills the earth. What a strange vision. So what is that all about? Daniel goes on to interpret this dream for the king. So what is the statue? Daniel says, well, the head of gold is you, O king. So the head of gold represents the Babylonian Empire. He then says, after you will come 3 other kingdoms that will be inferior to you. And so note that the materials of which the statue is made become less and less valuable, from gold to silver to bronze to iron, but they also become stronger. Following these 4 kingdoms, what is this stone that smashes the feet of the statue so that the whole statue collapses and is carried away by the wind? Daniel then says that this stone represents a divine eternal kingdom that will never be destroyed, that will be established at the time of this 4th kingdom. So here is Daniel's interpretation. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Nebuchadnezzar is very impressed by this interpretation of the dream, and so he not only honors Daniel, but also praises the God of the heavens, the God of Israel. Repeatedly in the book of Daniel, we see these pagan kings who are impressed by the power and sovereignty of the God of Daniel and his 3 friends, and so we see a type of conversion, at least temporary, of these kings who acknowledge the greatness of the God of Israel. Now let's talk a little more about those 4 kingdoms. So as you can see on the slide, here is the great image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Each section represents a world-ruling superpower. Each succeeding metal is less valuable, but each succeeding metal is stronger as each empire was more powerful than the last. So historically, we know what these parts of the statue represent. As we said, Daniel does say explicitly that the head of gold represents Babylon, of which Nebuchadnezzar was king. Then historically, we know that the chest and arms of silver is going to represent the empire of the Medes and the Persians, which conquered and supplanted Babylon. Then the bronze belly and thighs represent the Greco-Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great, which swallowed up Persia. Then the iron legs represent the Roman Empire. We know that after Alexander's death, his Hellenistic Empire continued in a divided form until its divisions were taken over by Rome. The 2 legs, apparently, signify the east-west division that characterized the late Roman Empire. And then we have the feet and toes of iron and clay, this brittle mixture that represented the final stage of the Roman Empire, which would have had some weak kings and some strong kings. So once again, here is the king's dream. Each part of the statue represents an empire. The head of gold, Babylon; the chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia; the belly and thighs of bronze, Greece; the legs of iron, Rome; and the feet of iron and clay, the 10 kingdoms near the end of the Roman Empire. And the stone that crushes the statue is the kingdom of God. Here we see another interesting representation of the 4 parts of the statue and the brittle feet with the stone cut without human hands that will establish the kingdom of God on earth. And we know that this is exactly how history played out. The kingdom of Babylon was taken over by the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, led by kings such as Cyrus the Great, Darius the First, and Xerxes the First. Then the kingdom of the Medes and Persians was taken over by the Greek Empire coming from the west, led by Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian Empire between 333 and 331 BC. Then, in the 1st century BC, the Roman Empire, with its iron legions, conquered the known world. In 285 AD, the Emperor Diocletian divides the Roman Empire into an eastern half and a western half, fulfilling Daniel's prophecy of the image having 2 legs. So we see how at the beginning of the book of Daniel, God reveals the future not just to his faithful prophet Daniel, but also to the great king Nebuchadnezzar. Unfortunately, even though Nebuchadnezzar does praise the God of Israel after this vision, the lesson is short-lived. In the very next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar erects an image of gold. So he makes an image of gold and commands all people to bow down and worship it. Those who refuse are to be cast into a fiery furnace. So by no coincidence, the head of gold of his previous dream, now he brings it to pass by building an entire statue of gold, which seems to hint at his desire to have a lasting kingdom and not to be taken over by other kingdoms as he saw in his dream. The Jews Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to bow down to the image, and they say to Nebuchadnezzar, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king." Nebuchadnezzar is furious, and just as he threatened, he commands for the three young men to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And this is where the Greek version of Daniel adds two beautiful sections, the prayer of Azariah and the song of the three young men. The prayer of Azariah is amazing because it's not just a cry of distress on the part of Azariah and his three friends, but he identifies with the whole nation of Israel, confessing the sins of the nation, saying that we basically got what we deserve because of our sins. We have been sent into exile, and it petitions the God of Israel to restore his people. So in other words, it's as if the fiery furnace is a symbol of the fiery furnace of the exile for the whole nation of Israel. So it's a beautiful prayer that shifts from the personal to the national. Then the song of the three young men is really a prayer of blessing to God, where they call upon all of creation to bless God for all of his goodness and his benefits that he has revealed to the world. Clearly, this prayer and song moved God to deliver the three young men. Nebuchadnezzar then sees not just three men, but he sees a fourth man in the furnace who looks like a son of God. Here's the reaction of King Nebuchadnezzar. "Did we not cast three men bound into the midst of the fire? Look, I see four men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." The three men remain unharmed, protected by this Son of God figure. They come out of the fire, and Nebuchadnezzar once again blesses God. So once again, we see the sovereignty of the God of the Jews over these superpowers, including the powerful king Nebuchadnezzar. Unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar has still not learnt his lesson. In chapter 4, he has another dream. The chapter begins with another proclamation of the king where he calls upon all the people who are subject to him to honor the God of the Jews. But then he has another dream, and once again he summons his wise men. This time he is a little more reasonable, and he does tell them his dream, but his wise men are still unable to interpret it. Then he calls upon Daniel, and Daniel, sure enough, is able to interpret the dream. So what did the king dream about? He describes it as such. "Behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it." He continues to describe the dream. "And behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, 'Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his lot be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and a beast's mind be given to him.'" Now, what is this dream about? Daniel goes on to interpret it. "The tree is Nebuchadnezzar himself, whose dominion reaches to the end of the earth." The tree cut off means that they shall drive you from men, your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. So the cutting off of the tree signifies the cutting off of Nebuchadnezzar from the throne. Daniel goes on to call the king to repentance. He says, "Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor." Unfortunately, a year goes by, and Nebuchadnezzar does not pay heed to Daniel's warning. And so after 12 months, we hear Nebuchadnezzar boasting, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" Immediately he hears a voice from heaven that says, "The kingdom has been taken from you." And not only that, the king goes mad, and he begins to eat grass like oxen, and his body is wet with the dew of heaven. So a humiliating end for Nebuchadnezzar. Only after some time his reason returns, and once again he praises the God of Israel. Once again we see the great sovereignty of the God of the Jews over even Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar dies in 562 BC, and that is the end of his influence upon Israel. In the next chapter, we meet Nebuchadnezzar's successor. This is Belshazzar, the son of Nabonidus, who co-reigned alongside his father. Belshazzar is just as proud as his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar. He makes a great feast with his lords, and they drink from the vessels taken from the Jerusalem temple as they praise their gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So we see a few things here. First, they are trying to establish their domination over apparently the God of Israel, since they destroyed his temple and deported all the sacred instruments from the temple. And so as they drink from these vessels of the temple, they're praising their gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. It's not a coincidence that we see the same materials that were used in the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the gold, silver, bronze, and iron. And so this points to both their pride, but also the futility of these gods that they serve and worship. In the middle of this banquet, a hand appears and writes a mysterious inscription on the wall. The king is startled. He summons his wise men, but they are unable to figure out what this inscription means. At the prompting of the queen, Daniel is brought, and sure enough, Daniel is able to interpret the writing on the wall. What does it say? Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, which means, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The king is very impressed. He goes on to bestow great honors upon Daniel, even making him third in the kingdom. But that very night, Belshazzar is killed as the Medes and Persians invade the Babylonian kingdom, and Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom. So it's the end of the period of Babylonian supremacy over the ancient Near East. Here is the Medo-Persian Empire that started off over here in the east, and they take over now the entire ancient Near East, an area that is even much greater than the former Babylonian Empire. We are in chapter 6 of the book of Daniel. Daniel distinguishes himself also under the kings of the Medes and the Persians. He is made a governor in Darius's kingdom and excels in all that he does. Unfortunately, jealous governors and satraps get the king to decree that whoever prays to a god other than him should be cast into the den of lions. Now Darius likes Daniel a lot, and he is not interested in causing him harm, but these decrees of the kings of the Medes and the Persians were irrevocable even by the king himself. Daniel still prays to God 3 times a day. He is not ashamed, and even leaves his windows open so that his foes see him and they report him to the king. Darius has no choice. He must execute his decree, and so Daniel is convicted and thrown into the den of lions. God sends his angel who shuts the lions' mouths and protects Daniel. The next morning, Darius the king returns and finds Daniel unharmed. He throws those who conspired against Daniel into the lion's den, and they are immediately eaten by the lions. And Darius goes on to proclaim that in every dominion of his kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. So in this 6th chapter of Daniel, we see a similar situation where the king of the Medes also ends up praising the God of Israel. Okay, we come to chapter 7 of Daniel, and as we said here, we see a major shift in the text, which shifts from these court stories to these apocalyptic visions. So what do we see in chapter 7? This is the first year of Belshazzar, and so we backtrack somewhat in time. We are back to 553 BC, and Daniel has a dream or a vision of 4 great beasts. What does he see? The first beast is like a lion with eagle's wings. The second is like a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth. The third beast is like a leopard with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads. And the fourth beast is dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It's got great iron teeth and 10 horns. Then he sees a little horn with eyes and a mouth speaking pompous words that replaces 3 of the first horns. Talk about strange. So what is the deal with this strange vision of the 4 beasts? Within the same vision, then, Daniel sees something extraordinary. He sees the Ancient of Days, God himself, seated on his throne, worshipped by all the host of angels. And within this vision, he sees the 4th beast that is killed, and its body is destroyed and burned. The other beasts have their dominion taken away, yet their lives are prolonged for a season and a time. And then what does Daniel see? He sees one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So here is the full text. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So who is this mysterious Son of Man who goes up in the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days? He seems to be distinct from God himself, yet at the same time, all nations worship him. They pay him homage. Who can receive homage but God himself? Also, the Son of Man establishes this everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. So it's very similar language to what we've seen in chapter 2, with a stone cut not by human hands that establishes God's kingdom on earth. So clearly there has to be some connection here. What's the interpretation of this strange vision? As it turns out, these 4 beasts are 4 kings that shall arise out of the earth. And we can obviously match them with the 4 parts of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Then we are told that the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess it forever. So this vision of these 4 terrifying beasts that are overcome by the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man really point to this spiritual warfare that is going on in the world, and how ultimately the kingdom of God and good will triumph over evil. What is this 4th beast? It's a 4th kingdom that devours the whole earth. The 10 horns represent 10 kings arising from this kingdom. And what about the little horn? This is another king who will subdue 3 kings, speak pompous words against the Most High, and persecute his saints. And so we know that this little horn will become later in Christian tradition a type of the Antichrist. This little horn will be destroyed, and the kingdoms will be given to the saints. So as you can see here on the slide, we can see the 4 beasts that basically match the 4 parts of the statue. The first one represents Babylon, the bear, the second one represents the kings of the Medes and Persians, then the leopard, the Greek Empire, and then the terrifying 4th beast represents Rome. In Daniel chapter 8, the text reverts back from Aramaic to Hebrew, and Daniel has yet another vision. What does he see? A ram with 2 horns that comes from the east and pushes westward, northward, and southward. Then he sees a male goat with a horn that comes from the west. Very rapidly, it attacks the ram, breaks its horns, and tramples it. So we see a decisive victory of this male goat against the ram. The goat goes on to grow very great, but then its horn is broken and replaced by 4 notable horns. And out of one of them comes a little horn which exalts itself very high. It takes away the daily sacrifices, and the sanctuary is overthrown for 2,300 days. As I said, these visions in the second part of Daniel are not for the faint of heart. So what's the deal with this vision of the ram and the goat? The angel Gabriel appears and interprets the vision for Daniel. As it turns out, the ram represents the kings of Media and Persia, so the currently reigning powers in the ancient Near East. And what is the goat? This is the king of Greece, and the great horn will be the first king of Greece, namely Alexander the Great. And we know that this was fulfilled at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, when Alexander the Great defeated Darius III and brought an end to the king of the Medes and Persians. Alexander's conquest marked the beginning of Greek rule over the ancient Near East. So from 333 to 331 BC, Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire. In 332 BC, Judea becomes a province of Alexander's empire. So once again, this confirms the initial vision in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and this would be the third part of the statue. There is the huge size of Alexander's empire. As we said, he starts off over here in Macedonia and conquers the entire ancient Near East, including the former kingdom of Persia and even great parts of Egypt. But then what about the four horns that emerge from the goat? While the four horns represent four kings, we know that after Alexander's death in 323 BC, his kingdom is divided by his four generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. For our purposes, the two important ones are Ptolemy, who reigned over Egypt, and Seleucus, who reigned over Syria. Judea will remain under the control of the Ptolemies from around 301 to 198 BC, and then the Seleucid king Antiochus III conquers Judea in 198 BC. Here is the map of the division of Alexander's empire. As we said, the Ptolemies are based here in Egypt. At first, Judea will be controlled by the Ptolemies, and then the Seleucids based in Syria will take over Israel in 198 BC. What about this little horn? This little horn signifies a king of bold face who will cause fearful destruction. Historically, we know that the little horn points to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who inherits the throne in 175 BC. So this Seleucid king who was a fierce persecutor of the Jews. In 168 BC, he begins a campaign of Hellenization, where he proclaims Judaism illegal, outlaws the Sabbath and circumcision. He goes on to plunder the temple in Jerusalem and enforces Zeus worship, sacrificing pigs and desecrating the temple. And so he launches this fierce persecution of the Jewish people in Jerusalem and in Judea much later, after the Jews have returned from their exile. It seems that this fourth horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, is not the same as the little horn that we read about in chapter 7 of Daniel, because that little horn was associated with the fourth beast, and here the little horn is associated with the third beast, that is the Greek Empire. We now come to Daniel chapter 9, one of the most fascinating chapters in the book of Daniel. It's the first year of Darius, 538 BC, and Daniel reads from the sacred books, and he's reading from the prophet Jeremiah. He understands that the captivity of 7 years spoken by the prophet Jeremiah will soon come to an end. So Daniel prays that God may have mercy on his sanctuary, his city, and his people. Here is part of Daniel's beautiful prayer where he repents on behalf of his people, begging the Lord to restore them back to their land. O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him, and with those who keep his commandments, we have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. O Lord, according to all your righteousness, I pray, let your anger and your fury be turned away from your city Jerusalem, your holy mountain. Cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. So a beautiful prayer expressing humility and repentance for the sins of his people. And this seems to really move God, because God will answer this prayer in a way that Daniel certainly did not expect. The angel Gabriel appears and has something to say to Daniel. He says, "First, Daniel, you are greatly beloved, and here is the Lord's answer to your prayer." And he goes on to reveal God's future plan for Jerusalem, which includes a mysterious oracle of 70 weeks. Let's read this oracle and see what we can make of it. It goes like this. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. All clear? No, not really, I know. It's a very obscure prophecy, and so let's see what we can make of it. Okay, so at the heart of this oracle of the 70 weeks, there is a prophecy of the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Here's again a section of this oracle. So from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. So we're talking about a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, which one? In fact, we know there were at least 4 decrees to rebuild Jerusalem, and we can find those in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The first decree was proclaimed by Cyrus in 538 BC, and you can find it in Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. But this decree was to build the temple only, not the city or wall, so it does not seem that this decree of Cyrus matches the decree mentioned in Daniel chapter 9. Darius the First also issued a decree in 521 BC. You can find it in Ezra 6, but this also was only for the building of the temple. It was in fact just a confirmation of Cyrus's decree. Then King Artaxerxes proclaimed a decree in his 7th year, which would have been 458 BC, and you can find it in Ezra chapter 7. This decree was a permission to reestablish worship. It actually does not mention anything about rebuilding the wall or the streets of the city. But then in Artaxerxes' 20th year, in the month of Nisan, which would have been 445 BC, you'll find that in Nehemiah chapter 2, the king does grant permission to build the gates and the city wall. So if we were to pick one of the decrees, certainly the second decree of Artaxerxes seems to match best the description of the decree in Daniel chapter 9. Only the 4th decree mentions the city gates and wall. Now let's do a bit of math. The decree of Daniel chapter 9, which seems to be the one that we find in Nehemiah chapter 2, was proclaimed in the month of Nisan in 445 BC. So if we go with the first of Nisan, this would be March 14th, 445 BC. If we add up the weeks from the proclamation of the decree to the coming of the Messiah, we know that the oracle in Daniel chapter 9 speaks of 7 weeks plus 62 weeks. So we have 69 weeks from the decree to the coming of the Messiah. Now, what is a week? It's not 7 days in this context, but it is 7 years. So 69 weeks of 7 years add up to 483 years. But we know that a Babylonian year was 360 days. So if we have 483 Babylonian years, this gives us 476 Julian years plus an extra 21 days. Now let's do the math. If we start with the decree of Artaxerxes from 445 BC, we add 476 years, we arrive at 32 AD. And since we started at March 14th, if we take our March 14th and add the 21 days that were left over, March 14th, 32 AD plus 21 days adds up to April 4th in 32 AD. As it turns out, April 10th in 32 AD was the Passover. So the decree of Daniel chapter 9 points to the coming of the Messiah in the week of the Passover in 32 AD. It seems like there was someone significant who appeared in Israel about that time and claimed to be the Messiah and accomplished God's salvation, not just for Israel, but for the entire world. So here we see the 70 weeks of Daniel. We just did the math for the 7 weeks, followed by the 62 weeks. But what about the last week? And here we can only speculate, but it seems like this last week would come at the end of times, because it occurs after the destruction of the temple. So what can we say about this 70th week? The 70th week cannot be juxtaposed to the 69 because it comes after the destruction of the city and the sanctuary. Once again, the oracle tells us that the prince will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, that is 7 years. In the middle of the week, he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering and establish the abomination of desolations. In the history of Christian interpretation, this has been seen as a prophecy of the coming of the Antichrist, of this deceiver who will come at the end of time and establish a deceitful covenant until he breaks it and then unleashes chaos and destruction upon the earth. Okay, so that's a quick overview of this mysterious oracle of the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9. We come to the final vision of the book of Daniel. This is the third year of Cyrus, and so something like 536 or 535 BC. Daniel is mourning and fasting. Once again, we see his exemplary piety and devotion to the Lord in the midst of exile. All of a sudden, Daniel sees a man clothed in linen. Here is his vision. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. Who is this man? We are not told. Perhaps it is the Son of Man that was introduced in chapter 7. This man goes on to tell Daniel that he has been fighting together with Michael the archangel against the prince of the kingdom of Persia. But now he has come to reveal to Daniel what will befall his people at the end of days. So in this vision, we are given some insights into the spiritual warfare that is occurring behind the scenes in the battle of this man clothed in linen, together with Michael, against various princes of nations, such as the prince of Persia, and later the prince of Greece is also mentioned. And now the man goes on to give yet another difficult vision to Daniel. He announces that there will be 4 more kings of Persia, but then a mighty king will arise, and this kingdom will be divided and scattered towards the 4 winds of heaven. Then he goes on to describe complex wars between so-called kings of the south against kings of the north. As it turns out, these kings of the south will be the Ptolemies, and the kings of the north will be the Seleucids. Then the vision goes on to describe a vile person who will come peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. He will take away the daily sacrifices, set up the abomination of desolation, and blaspheme God. So it sounds a lot like the little horn and these figures of evil that we've seen in previous visions. So what is this vision of Daniel chapter 11? Well, the 4 kings of Persia point to the kings that will follow the reign of Cyrus and Darius, probably Cambyses, Smerdis, Darius I, and Xerxes I. Then the mighty king is Alexander the Great. Recall the goat that is going to trample the ram, and his kingdom divided towards the 4 winds of heaven point to Alexander's 4 generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, as we saw earlier. The kings of the north fighting against the kings of the south point to the Seleucids fighting wars against the Ptolemies. Who is this contemptible person? This obviously points to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, once again the little horn, and this figure of evil who is going to persecute the Jews, but is also a symbol of the future Antichrist to come. Finally, at the end, this king does not seem to match the life of Antiochus IV, and so some church fathers have said the figure of the contemptible person or king shifts from the historical figure of Antiochus to the future Antichrist to come. Without getting into the details, here we can see the map of the prophecies in Daniel 11. There is the Seleucid Empire, which is going to fight against the Ptolemaic Empire, the kings of the south against the kings of the north. So here are the various battles, and this is described in such detail that most modern scholars today say that the book of Daniel was probably written in the 2nd century because it describes with such accuracy these battles between the kings of the north and kings of the south, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Of course, we know that if this is genuinely prophecy, God could have known in advance how these battles would play out. In chapter 12 of the book of Daniel, it's a vision of the final tribulation and resurrection. And the text tells us this: At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So truly a vision of the end times here and of the final judgment. It's the first hint of eternal life and eternal condemnation that we find in the Old Testament. We know that the concept of heaven and hell will be developed especially in the New Testament, but here the book of Daniel anticipates this future judgment and eternal judgment of all people on earth. The man goes on to say that this revelation is to be sealed until the end of times, so no wonder that it is so obscure. As we conclude the Hebrew and Aramaic part of Daniel, we see on this slide a summary of the major visions that we've seen. So here is the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream with the 4 parts that match up the 4 beasts representing these powerful kingdoms that are to be toppled by the kingdom of God. The ram and the goat match up with the kingdoms of Medo-Persia and Greece. And then we also have the various kings that we find in Daniel chapters 11 and 12. We are not quite done. There is still a chapter 13 and 14 in the Greek part of the book of Daniel. Chapter 13 backtracks to early in Daniel's life, and this is the story of Susanna and the elders. Susanna is a beautiful Jewish woman whose beauty attracts the attention of 2 wicked elders. These wicked elders attempt to seduce Susanna as she is walking in her garden, and when she refuses to go along with their wicked schemes, they accuse her of betraying her husband with a younger man. The elders testify against Susanna, and then in what appears to be the first appearance of Daniel, we know that actually this chapter appears as a prologue in some versions of Daniel. Daniel shows up and rescues Susanna by cross-examining these 2 wicked elders and showing how their stories contradict each other. So we see this early encounter with Daniel, who already exercises his wisdom under the Babylonian Empire. At the end of the book, there is another incident that is found only in the Greek version. This is the story of Bel and the dragon. Bel is the Babylonian god who received offerings of food every day, and it seemed like Bel consumed these offerings that were given to him. Daniel mocks this as a fraud, and as it turns out, the priests of Bel were the ones who had a secret entrance and took the food that was offered to Bel for themselves and for their families. And so Daniel manages to expose this fraud by spreading ash on the floor so that the king sees the footsteps of the priests who were deceiving everyone into believing that Bel was actually a real god. This is followed by the episode of Daniel who kills a dragon, once again establishing the supremacy of the God of Israel over these false Babylonian gods and powers. This once again unleashes the jealousy of the Babylonians, who throw Daniel into the lion's den. And there God sends the prophet Habakkuk from Judea to feed Daniel and protect him. So probably apocryphal stories in these last 2 chapters of Daniel that we find only in the Greek version. All these stories reveal once again how God protects his faithful ones even in the midst of exile, and he will richly reward them in the end. In the midst of exile, God watched over his people. He promised that he would judge the nations and restore the Jews back to their land. Join us next time as we witness the fulfillment of these promises in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the return to Zion.